So you can start by looking for this by just Googling for Neo4j drivers. So you get two links. One is the Neo4j drivers manual, and then developer pages around drivers and language guides. And the driver manual is more of an reference manual that gets you through the different languages, the concepts of the drivers, driver session, database, authorization, connection details, configuration, routing, and all these things, right? So here, like in the driver manual, there are examples for the four main official drivers, official languages, which are C#, Java, JavaScript, and Python, and Go also exists, but it has a different manual right now until it has caught up in versions, because this is 4.1 and Go is at 1.8 right now. And most of these examples are actually the same content, but in a different languages, right? So let's see if we get this working. So what's important is also you have the driver docs links also here, so you can also check out the driver docs for each of those things as well. For some of those, they also show the imports. For instance, the C# one is missing the imports, so that's probably something that we need to add here as such. For the developer guides, what we try to do is to have a more like friendly tutorial style getting started experience, where you basically see a little bit about the language, how to install the driver, and then the example code. But as I can see here, this also misses the imports, which is of course annoying, especially for static languages. What's really important more recently is connection to the server. So now it's kind of this full table of connection details. So previously Neo4j only had like Bolt as a protocol, and with 4.0 it got much more involved in terms of cluster standalone and certificates, because now the default for any production setup should be Neo4j plus S, which is encryption with certificates. The unencrypted ones are just called Neo4j for clusters or for standalone. And if you rarely want to connect to a single instance, then you can still use Bolt, but in general Neo4j as a protocol is recommended. And then the exception should be self-signed certificates, which is Neo4j plus SCC. Okay, so you have for every language here also an example, which is meant to be a little bit more user-friendly than the driver's manual, right? So let's get started. So what I did, I created a local instance of Neo4j in desktop, just putting in the movie graph. I created an instance of Neo4j sandbox here. What's important in sandbox is you can open the sandbox with browser and then create your data or input your data. The connection details you can find here in sandbox. So you have the IP address, you have the username, password, and Bolt URL. So these username, password, Bolt URL are the things that you will need. Neo4j sandbox still runs Neo4j 3.5. That's why there's no Neo4j protocol here yet. The latest Neo4j drivers can also connect via the Neo4j protocol to Bolt and to 3.5 instances, so that should also work. We can actually try this in a second. And then the other thing that I did is on Neo4j Aura, I also created a database just now. So I have now two databases running, and this is the movies database. I also created the movies graph there. And what you have in Aura is also you have a connect page, either on a database level or globally, which also shows some code examples for drivers as well. Right. So if you want to get started with a simple example, so I have, there's one thing missing that I wanted to say. So what we tried to do is, that's still work in progress. I think I showed it like 2 or 3 Twitch sessions ago. We have these kind of GitHub repositories, Neo4j graph examples, which are meant to mirror the sandbox examples in the sandbox. And one that I want to look at today is movies, because they are already created the code folder with code examples for the different languages as well. So for instance, you can here look at the Python example and then use that. Right. Okay, that's what I have cloned locally on my computer, so we can use it from there. Hi Steven, you're using the Perl driver, so what's his name? Martin Jensen created a Perl driver, so on cpan we can find Neo4j driver, and so actually he created one. There are actually two, right? So there's a Neo4j driver. Steven, I'm not sure if you're using this one, the Bolt driver, and there's also one from Martin Jensen or Mark Jensen, which has been around for longer. But this one is actually quite nice. So we have a developer page on Neo4j.com developer Perl. So we should probably add this one. So Steven, if you're interested in perhaps adding an example for this, oh no, here it's already here. Neo4j driver. If you're interested in adding an example for this, feel free. You can go to Neo4j.com developer Perl, click on edit this page, and add, for instance, a code example or something like that. So that's would be much appreciated. So there are just ASCII doc files that we can edit and then send in a pull request for these pages. Cool, but I'm not sure I will be able to show the Perl driver right now, but you probably know how to use it, right? Okay, so it's basically similar for most drivers are these concepts of initially we have a database that we connect to with an URI and then authentication. So the different users in the database can have different permissions if you use Neo4j Enterprise, which runs by default on Aura and Sandbox and in desktop as well. So you can have users which have full admin permission, people that have only read-only access or read-write access, and then there are also like a lot of different roles and permissions on data level security as well. So that's on a driver level, which is okay. It would be nicer if there was a lower level or an sub-level of where you can switch the user in a actual current driver, but currently it's the way that on a driver level you have to connect with the database user. So if you want to use multiple database users, you have to create different drivers. What you have to watch out for, each driver also creates a connection pool, which is more expensive. So you should definitely not create a driver in your request method or in the method where you do your query, but you should only create one driver per application, to say so, or per service, and then use that driver from the other methods. And usually it works like this, that you from the driver then create a session, and from the session you can run read and write transactions. So there's also session.run, which you could also use in certain circumstances, but it's safer if you use the transaction methods. So with read and write transaction, because then you get things like read write in the driver, and it works better with Aura, which rotates servers around more quicker in a cluster more quickly. So let's get started with a quick example. So I have my VS Code here. Let's see if this is the right one. Yeah. So here we have our Python example. I just changed it a little bit to get the Neo4j URL and password from the environment, so we can connect to the different databases. We get a driver here with this URL, Neo4j as the user and the password, and then we create a session, and then we can call here Neo4j session run, and the Cypher query is passed in, and a parameter is passed in. And that's actually something I wanted to mention. Parameters are quite important in Cypher queries, because for once they save you from SQL injection. So if I would say something like I don't know, plus favorites or so, right? So then someone could inject malicious code, and so if you use parameters, this can't happen. And the second benefit is, because the query stays always the same no matter what kind of parameters you pass in, the Cypher engine can compile and cache this query plan for this query once, and then it's reused time and again. So it's much faster to run these queries with parameters. So that's definitely an important recommendation. Okay, and if you want to run this, we can do so. We can look here into the Python directory. So what's important is with Neo4j driver 4.x, support for Python 2 was dropped. So we need to use Python 3, and we can just do pip install Neo4j, and then the Python driver is installed, version 4.1.0. And then we can use it, right? So what I created here, I created 3 files that are for Aura, for Sandbox, and for localhost. That's so that I can just pull in the credentials for the Python driver really quickly. So I can say, for instance, .local source this, and then I can say echo Neo4j URL is localhost, and if I do Sandbox, then Neo4j URL is Sandbox URL. So, and if I now run Python 3, the example, then I get our results. We can also do this interactively, of course. Then I have to copy and paste it in. Where's it? Yeah. So we can just do the imports, get URL and password and the driver as the first part, and paste this in. So we have print URL, So that would be our URL, and then we have our session. And from our session, so let's create a Cypher query here. Print Cypher. Oops. Query. And then we basically execute the Cypher query here and get results back. And if I look at the results, then we get a result object, and then we can iterate over this result object as an iterator or an enumerable, depending on the language, and access each element from the result. So there are 2 things that I want to show here. One is this uses session run, which I just mentioned we shouldn't use, right? So we should update this to session tx and then read transaction. And this takes a function. So we can just say def read, and we pass in a tx, and basically run this inside of the read transaction. So we say tx.run, and then basically use the same code as we had before. And return this. We can also call it, let's call it just read. So, right, so this should be the proper way of doing it with a read transaction. Let's see if it still works. No, I made a mistake by forgetting and having one parenthesis too much. Okay, let's try this again. Session object has no. Oh, session read transaction read. Is this? So driver session read transaction, and then I pass in So you see we need to check this out, but that should not be a problem because we can just look in the Python code examples, and it says so this is tx1 session read transaction, and that should be passed in the method. And this returns tx1 with these parameters. If you can spot what I did wrong, it should actually be retx return. Favorites, Cypher query, bold URL. Okay, something went wrong here, but it doesn't complain about anything. So what happens if I just change this? Then it complains that it has not the right. Okay, it gets here, but then either our query doesn't return anything, but I can't imagine because it's the same query. That's weird. So let's undo my change and continue here because I wanted to show you the different example connections and the other examples as well. So let's see. So this still works again. So I have to figure out what's wrong there. So what I wanted to show you is kind of that it also works with the remote connections. So if I do, for instance, the sandbox one, then it should run against sandbox, and I renamed the movie titles a little bit in sandbox, so we should see a difference that these SS are now $signs. And I said before that this bold URL should be possible to use Neo4j as an connection URL, so this also works. And actually they should have certificates as well, I'm not sure, let's see. Yeah. So, sorry. No, they don't have certificates. So, but Neo4j should work as a protocol, let's see. No. So what does it complain about? Server does not support routing. That's interesting because it's a single instance, right? But I actually thought it would support on the 4.1 driver also Neo4j protocol against bold, single instances. Anyway, so if you use bold again, then it actually works. So and the same for Aura. So in the Aura case, we have Neo4j plus S. And if I run Python example again, it shows us the other examples where I replace the A with an @ sign. Yeah, but I really wonder why my example. Hey Marcus. Marcus is using Python, I think, right? And JQ Assistant. So basically. What I was just looking at was the examples here. So what I wanted to look at quickly, but which I probably want to do in the Java example, or in the Java example, is a type system, because in Python it doesn't really matter so much what the types are, right? So we can return different things as different types. Basically, the Neo4j drivers have their own type system. So there's also a manual entry for that. So these are all the types that the driver support. Some of those are only supported in results. Others are also reported as input types, as parameters. So the graph types, the node relationship and path are unfortunately not supported as parameters, but as results. And lists and maps, because we can create them from Cypher as well, are also supported. So in the different languages, the result method has or the record has methods to take a turn a value of a record into these types, right? So if you have especially a statically typed language, then you would say, okay, record get name and then a string, or record get movie as node, for instance, right? So, and that's something that we can try from Java actually. Let's see how far we get there. So our example here in the sandbox is really bare bones. So what it says is we should download the JAWS. Usually, of course, what you would do is add it to a POM or Gradle file. So it has the driver jar and reactive streams. So you would usually just put it in a POM file. But you can also just download a jar file somewhere here. Where's the jar? Download jar. And we want to put it into, can put it into downloads. And where's the other example? Reactive streams. So we need the driver for compiling and reactive streams for running the example. So, and then we can just take this example that we had here. This one? No, it's the other one. Yeah. So, and in Java example is host port. So we can just say system get and then Neo4j URL. String URL. And string pass is system get and Neo4j pass, and then we just pass in URL here, here Neo4j. Can probably make it a bit bigger, and here pass. Neo4j should of course be in. This, and then let's see if this runs initially. So we can just say we copy to our terminal. Oops. So it's a little bit too much. I should have done this. Okay, if you run this JavaC and Java, it should hopefully work. And it complains about it can't find Neo4j driver config. Why can't it find Neo4j driver config? Okay. That's a good question. Neo4j driver config. Do we actually use config here? Yeah. So perhaps this changed. Let's have a look. From Java. So which also kind of gives us an opportunity to look at the, you know, so that's driver. Or we probably don't need the config at all anymore because the encryption is now handled through the URL. So that should be hopefully no SSL. So, and it doesn't like auth tokens. Why doesn't it like auth tokens? Basic Neo4j driver auth tokens. Neo4j driver. Neo4j driver star auth tokens basic. Can anyone see what I'm doing wrong here? Neo4j Java driver 401, reactive streams 103. No class def found error. I should probably have taken the POM file approach here. Right. Why doesn't it find the auth tokens? Good question. Neo4j driver auth tokens. So is something wrong with my class path here? Probably. So we see here are the examples from, that's from Aura, right? So if you do localhost, then we should see the local ones, right? So if you want to do now different data types, so this is basically returning a string, right? So if you want to do different data types, then we have to convert things to something else, right? So instead, if we don't return the title of the recommendation, but the movie itself, then we would say rec get rec, and then s node, and then we could say if you output this, so if you output this, we get like these node entities back, and then we could say get title. I think it's get, it's not get property. Let's see. Yeah, so we get the title specs, right? So which are then strings. So we could here say a string again, or we could say if we get the released here, released, and would say a string, it should complain because it's an int actually. See. So it says can't convert integer to a string, right? So, but if we say as integer, then it would convert it actually to a long, right? Should probably say as long or as number. Right, so now we see the so in all the different data types, so lists, maps, and so on can be converted from the driver as such. Right, so and that's in all the other languages as well. So you can also say, okay, in .NET I have a relationship object and want to get it as a relationship. Okay, and we see again we use parameters here. The syntax is a little bit different, so we use value.parameters as a static import to pass in this from here. Cool. So in Java there's lots of other options as well. So as you can see here in the dropdown, Michael Simmons created a Spring Boot starter for the Java driver, which gives you auto configuration for the Neo4j driver. So you get a really easy way of just configuring the Neo4j driver with these application property entries, and then it gets an auto injected into your application. So you then basically get a driver injected here, and you can use it, right? And you can use both these synchronous APIs, but also the async API. So this is the synchronous API. As you can see here, you can just also take session run and then convert things on the fly. There's a .list method on the Java driver, which basically takes each record, and then for each record you can turn it into an POJO or whatever you want to turn it into. Might also covered here logging, and there's also health information about the drivers and driver metrics. So he also exposed here in the starter micrometer metrics about all these driver aspects as well, which is really cool. Then there's also Spring Data Neo4j, which is kind of the next step from here, which uses the Java driver to create an object graph mapping. And I had this 2 weeks ago in a session. SDN6 is the newest member of that, which is the successor or the renamed version of SDNIX, which offers both reactive data access as well as regular data access. Speaking of reactive data access, so it's something that I want to show you as well. So most of the Neo4j drivers, because the database supports reactive data access, now support also reactive APIs. So here's the Java example again. Let me make this a little bit bigger, where you basically can use the driver to get a reactive session, and then the session would allow you to run the query, and the reactive session records method returns a flux or an IX observable. I'm currently not sure. And then you can create a flux from that, and then do all the reactive things as I showed 2 weeks ago, including like filtering, mapping, delays, and things like that. And then you at the end you close the session again. So, and this is done by using back pressure on the wire. So the driver actually says how to consume the data in chunks, basically from the server. So only as much or as many resources are used at any given time as you really need for running these reactive sessions. And that's already built into the driver. So if I take my code here and would change this to the reactive API, then it would also work out of the box. Okay, the next thing that I want to show quickly is the .NET thing. So just before the session I had some fun getting .NET to run first on Linux, but now I got it to run, and I did like .NET create, what's it called? .NET create a project, and it created a tiny project with a Hello World program for me. I could run this, which was really cool. And then I added with .NET at Neo4j the Neo4j driver, or sorry, I did .NET at Neo4j.driver, which added the Neo4j driver. So if I now look at the .NET CS project, you see it's in console app. So I created a console application, and it includes the Neo4j driver. So it fetches the Neo4j driver from NuGet and adds it to my project, which is really cool. And now I worked on my program and tried to get it to work. I initially had some problems with this, but now it actually works. So I originally started with the synchronous version, but didn't realize that we need extension methods for that. So my colleague Chris Garden helped me to rewrite this into the async version. And so, which means we get immediately an example for the async APIs of the Neo4j driver. So if you look into the Neo4j driver manual, there's the simple session, which is imperative, synchronous, asynchronous sessions, and reactive sessions. And the asynchronous sessions are what are in this example for the C# driver. So it's basically using async session as the source, and then using all the star.async methods. So run retransaction async, run async, and then fetch async or toList async, and then you get the things back, and then you basically sprinkle await in all these places where you use the async methods. What's important, what I missed initially, is you have to also use async tx in the lambda here. Otherwise it will complain. Right. So if you look at the other VS Code, this one here, no, that's the wrong one. This one. So we have now an async task main, not void main anymore, because it's an async method and it returns a task. We create our driver, created the async session, which is not an async operation, which I also had to learn. And then basically from here you run retransaction async with await. So that's handling the continuations. And then you get an async tx lambda, and then in here you do run async, pass in parameters as a dictionary and or as a tuple here, and then get the results back. And you get an async list, which if you just output it, it just says async list, and each entry in this list is a record from this result. So if it had multiple results, so for instance, if I say m.released as well, then I could also output this. So I have these records here as result, and then I can say plus and say record released as int. I wonder why they didn't override the cast operator here, but yeah. So, and if I now go here and say .NET run, it should hopefully, if I didn't break anything. Oh, as released. See, it helps me even complaining about non-existing keys. So, and now we get our results back from our database. And same way as we had before, we can just externalize the connection details and then connect to any other database. So that's an async example in running .NET on Linux, which is really cool. Welcome to the new age. And the last example that I want to look into concretely before we go on to some of the community drivers is the JavaScript one. Because the JavaScript one is really concise. So we basically just do require an Neo4j driver. So we can go into the JavaScript. So we can say npm e and then npm install save Neo4j driver, and while npm is so there's Neo4j driver, and while npm is to download the internet, we could adjust our information here. So we just use both localhost, Neo4j, and test, and then we should see our example running here. So if I do node example.js, it gives me the data back. All right. So what I want to show you in the JavaScript one is actually that it's pretty fast. Imagine we didn't have this movie query here, but we had a query that would generate a lot of data. So let's say we just say unwind range from 1 to, let's say, 1 million to start with, right? As ID, return ID, right? So, and then we run our query, and instead of outputting the 1 million IDs, I just want to increment a counter, right? So var counter equals 0, and then instead of doing here the output, I do just the get. So I just want to access the record, but then I do counter plus plus, and at the end we close the session and close the driver, right? So, and after we did all of that, we output records counter. So let's start with this. So ID is the, so let's see if this works. So we should get 1 million records back from the database. Let's see if this, how this works. Unwind range 1 million. SID return ID. Oops. What? Wrong language. This is actually really interesting because it should be much faster to fetch 1 million records from Neo4j. That's actually what I wanted to show you. That it's much faster than this. So this was way too slow to fetch 1 million records. So I have to see why that is. Because it's using the Promise API as such. So while I'm looking for this real quick, Ravi, which data structure is used for label store? That's a good question. So the label store is stored in a B+3 on in Neo4j, which is basically for each label the IDs for the nodes are kept in a B+3. So we wanted to look for Neo4j JavaScript driver, and sorry, the GitHub repo or the APIs, and we wanted to look at session, yeah. So a session run gives me a result. There's a typo. So which gives me back a promise. Let me see, I had an example somewhere. Where was this? That's weird. So let's see. Yeah, let's see. Let's use the streaming API. So we just do on next, and on completed we do the. So on next is a function of record, and we get the record here, and on complete we have a function which then is these things. So, and this would be on error. So did I misspell anything? Or do you have to do the subscribe as well? Alright. Subscribe, and then we pass in functions. Okay, session run, subscribe, and then on next is basically record, on complete is nothing, and on error is error. So console log error, and then the all subscribe is finished here. So this is this, and then a bunch of commas, and then our subscribe ends. So, and if I didn't do any mistake here, hopefully this should run faster. Let's see. Or I broke something else. Because in my past experiments, it was always like a few milliseconds to just fetch the data. So instead, if you use unwind instead of unwind, just a match n, return ID of n. Let's see if this is faster. Something is really weird here. So it's bold localhost Neo4j driver. Okay, this is proper demo. Oh, uncompleted. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. I. So, okay, 171. Okay, and we just create a cross product here and see how much we get back now. So it should be 171 to the power of 3. Well, let's start with power of 2. Oops. 29,000, and then times 200 is a few million. So perhaps limit 1 million. This is still not as fast as it used to be. So I need to see what's wrong here, because this kind of destroys my demo, which is kind of weird. in datetime. So date time now. So this took this on you then. Sorry, wrong language. So, but at least we did see the Reactive API for Node as well. So that's at least something. Okay, but this is way too slow. So it used to be really, really fast, and I need to figure out what's wrong. So this is 128 seconds or 12 seconds? It's 12 seconds actually. So it should be less than 1 second, because if you look at our medium block in the visualization section, I had one blog post here at the beginning which said, yeah, hands-on graph data visualization, and I did these experiments before, and here at the end I had a performance example which fetched 1 million records in 912 milliseconds, right? And with the same code, as you can see, right? So something seems to be wrong here, as such. So I need to figure out what happened there, which is really weird. So what could be one reason is that my Neo4j desktop is running with a configuration that has a little bit too little memory for this, but it shouldn't matter. So let's see if I change this to 4 gigs. Apply restart. While Neo4j is restarting, what I wanted to show you as well is if you go to Neo4j.com developer to language drivers, of course we don't just have the official drivers, but also a lot of community contributed drivers for other languages. So here on the first table, on the first page, there's a table of all the other languages as well. So there's also Ruby driver, which is maintained as part of the Neo4j RB project by Heinrich. PHP is currently in development. There used to be GraphAware driver, which got paused, but now there are other people picking it up. There's an Erlang and Elixir driver from Florin. The Perl driver, as you already mentioned. There's C++ drivers, Clojure drivers, Haskell drivers, and R drivers as well. And so we have also some engagement around Go. So the official driver of Neo4j, the 1.8 driver, got just released a few weeks ago. And then there's also community drivers from Mindstand, which have built also an object graph mapper for Go and also an CypherDSL. So there's an Go CypherDSL, Go OGM, and the examples. I'm just waiting for them to add their information to the drivers page here as well. And so I'm really looking forward to that. So our server restarted, and this is something that's really weird. So I have to figure out why this is happening. So I have one idea. What we could do is to change the runtime and see if this is faster. And then the other thing that we could try is compiled runtime doesn't exist anymore, which was the fastest runtime. So this didn't make a big difference. At least I think the runtime, compiled runtime doesn't exist anymore. Okay, this is definitely something I need to investigate what happened here. Cool. Any other questions from anyone? Anything else that you want to see? So SDN we already covered last time. There's also GRANDstack, which I also covered before, and which uses the JavaScript driver under the hood. Spring Data Neo4j uses the Java driver under the hood, and for Neo4j GraphQL Java, you can also use the Java driver as well. What else did I want to talk about? I think that's mostly it. Any other questions from anyone? If not, it's at the hour now. I hope this was useful to you and you saw me a little bit struggle with some of the stuff. I'm really glad that I got .NET to run on my Linux machine, which is really cool. I need to figure out what's wrong here with the example, and I really need to find the time to update these examples to be better as such. So if you want to lend a hand, let me know, and I'd be happy to take pull requests for these. So actually for the graph examples, as I showed a while ago, what I was working on is this template project, which then uses templated code examples which has just placeholders for query and parameter names and values and result columns, and then it's generated for each sandbox project depending on the data model of the sandbox project. So that's currently something that I haven't finished yet. But as part of that, I should also update the code examples to have the latest and greatest APIs as well. Cool, that's it for me. If you have questions, feel free to reach me in Slack. So you can come to the Neo4j user Slack or on the community side, so on community.neo4j.com. There's also a drivers section there as well. If you're interested in working on drivers and contributing to drivers, let me know as well, and then we would be happy to so here's drivers and stacks, which has all the categories: GRANDstack, Python, Java, JavaScript, Spring Data, Neo4j, .NET, Go, R, PHP, Ruby, Perl, and Elixir. So if you have questions, feel free to ask your questions there as well. Cool, thank you all. I hope you have a good day and talk soon. Bye bye.